At 4:38 on a Friday afternoon, our CEO appeared on a video call and ordered the finance department to transfer $18 million before the bank closed. Everyone believed him. His face was right. His voice was right. He knew details about the acquisition that fewer than 10 people in the company had ever heard. I was the temporary receptionist. I was also the only person in the room who knew it wasn't him. At 4:44, I tried to stop the transfer. At 4:51, the CFO ordered security to remove me from the finance floor. And at 5:06, Human Resources began preparing a report that blamed me for leaking the banking instructions. They thought the easiest person to sacrifice was the woman everyone walked past without looking. They had forgotten one thing. Receptionists see everyone who enters, they hear every call that gets transferred, and they keep the records executives never think to check. Before I take you back to that Friday, before I show you how a company almost lost $18 million in 28 minutes, and how the people at the top tried to pin the whole thing on the one person nobody ever noticed, I want to ask you something. If you have ever been the person in the room everyone talks over, if you have ever done a job where people can't quite remember your name, if you have ever caught something that everyone above you missed and been told it wasn't your place to speak, then this story is for you. So take 1 second, tap subscribe, hit the like button, and tell me in the comments, have you ever spotted a mistake at work that the people in charge refuse to see? I read every reply, and stories like this one are exactly why I keep telling them. Now, let me take you back to that Friday afternoon. For 6 months, I sat at the front desk of Redwood Biotech, and for 6 months, most of the company looked straight through me. Redwood was a medical technology firm, the kind of place with brushed steel doors, a lobby that smelled faintly of nothing, and a founder whose face was printed on the wall behind me in a photograph nobody ever looked at either. I was 26, I had a business degree I hadn't been able to use, a 6-month temporary contract, and 3 weeks left before someone decided whether I got to stay. My job, as far as the executives understood it, was simple. I signed visitors in and out. I took delivery of the legal packages that arrived sealed and stamped and marked confidential. I transferred phone calls. I tracked the cars that carried leadership to the airport and back. I booked conference rooms. I noticed who arrived first in the morning and who left last at night. Most of the staff never learned my name. To some of them, I was simply the temp at the front. A woman would walk past me talking into her phone, drop an empty coffee cup on the edge of my desk without breaking stride, and never once make eye contact. A director would ask me to call him a car and then complain loudly to the person beside him that the front desk can never get anything right. But here is what they didn't understand about the front desk. I knew which of them had a job interview at another company because I heard the calls I transferred and I saw the way they lowered their voices when they took them. I knew which vendors showed up without an appointment because I was the one who had to decide whether to let them in. I knew which executive claimed to be travelling for work and then walked through the lobby at 9 the next morning. I knew which phone calls came in asking every single time that no name be written down. They thought the reception desk was where information stopped. It was actually the place every lie had to pass through before it got into the building. That autumn, Redwood was preparing to acquire a small laboratory called Solace Therapeutics. It was the kind of deal a company keeps in a locked drawer. Only a handful of people knew the purchase price. Fewer knew the signing date. Fewer still knew the name of the law firm handling it, or the bank holding the escrow, the account where the money would sit until every signature was in place. I wasn't supposed to know any of it, and mostly I didn't. But you can't keep a receptionist entirely in the dark when the receptionist is the one who meets the lawyers at the door, receives the documents, coordinates the CEO's car, and turns away every phone call that can't be verified. I knew the shape of the thing, even if I didn't know its contents. And I knew Julian Mercer. Julian was Redwood's founder, 55 years old, a man who had built the company from a rented room and never quite lost the habit of running it like one. He had a particular way of speaking, little phrases he used over and over, the way people do without realizing it. And he had one habit that everyone who worked closely with him knew. He never called his executive assistant by her full name. Amelia Ross had worked for him for years, and to Julian, she was only ever Mel, never Amelia. Not once in 6 months of transferred calls had I heard him say the full word. That Friday morning, I was the one who walked Julian out to his car. He was flying to Europe to close the acquisition in person, and on his way out the door, He stopped at my desk and said something that, at the time, sounded like nothing at all. "I'll be on the plane most of the day," he told me. "No signal, phone's off. If anyone tells you I called back to change the wiring instructions on this deal, anyone for any reason, I want you to make them go through Mel's verification process. Every step, no exceptions." I said, of course. He nodded, got in the car and left. By that afternoon, those two sentences were the only thing standing between Redwood and $18 million. At a little after 11 that morning, a man walked up to my desk who wasn't supposed to be there. He was well-dressed, calm, unhurried. He said his name was Peter Vance, that he was from the law firm handling the acquisition, and that he needed to see Graham Holt, our chief financial officer, right away. I checked the calendar. There was no Peter Vance on it. No appointment, no note, no advance email from anyone. When someone from an outside firm was scheduled to enter during a confidential deal, I always had a name in advance. Always. I called up to Graham's floor. I told him a Peter Vance was in the lobby, that I didn't have him on the list, and asked how he'd like me to proceed. Graham didn't hesitate. "Send him up," he said. "He's expected. Don't bother with the full sign-in. He's in a hurry." I sent him up. But I didn't skip the sign-in. I never did. I wrote down his name, the phone number he gave me, the exact time he entered, the plate on the car he'd arrived in, and the extension that had approved him, Graham's. Peter Vance carried a small briefcase when he came in. He left the building a little over 20 minutes later without it. I noticed. I always noticed. But at the time, I didn't think much of it. People forget things. People come back. I wrote a small note and moved on with my afternoon. I had no idea I had just watched a fraud walk in through the front door and set itself down in the CFO's office. At 3:40 that afternoon, a courier arrived carrying a sealed envelope. He was from the actual law firm, the real one, the one whose verified number I had on file. The envelope was heavy card, sealed at the flap, and printed across the front in blunt black letters. Escrow instructions, hand delivery only. I signed for it. Then I tried to reach Amelia, because she was the one who was supposed to handle anything touching the wire. Her line went to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. So I followed the procedure I'd followed for 6 months. I logged the envelope, sealed and unopened, into the confidential document cabinet behind my desk, and I noted the time. 10 minutes later, Graham called down. "Did anything come in for me from the firm?" I told him yes. An envelope had arrived marked hand delivery, escrow instructions. Good. Bring it straight up to my office. I explained that I couldn't, not without him or an authorised recipient signing the confidential delivery log. That was the rule. Hand delivery items required a signature from the person receiving them in the book at the desk. If he came down and signed, it was his in 30 seconds. There was a pause on the line. "I don't have a time to come down there," he said, and hung up. He never came. He never signed. So the real instructions, the genuine escrow account, in a sealed envelope from the genuine law firm, stayed exactly where they were, in the cabinet behind me at the front desk. Later I would understand why he'd been so eager to get that envelope into his hands without a single record of it passing through mine. But at 3:50 that afternoon, all I knew was that a CFO had refused to sign for his own confidential mail. At 4:38, the finance department opened a video call and Julian Mercer's face filled the screen. I know this because the finance floor sat just off the main corridor and the conference room door had been left open, and I was walking through with a stack of courier documents when I heard his voice. I stopped. On the screen, Julian was explaining that there had been a last-minute legal complication. The escrow account had changed. He needed the transfer redirected to a new account, and he needed it done before the bank closed at 5. He was calm, authoritative, completely himself, and 3 things were wrong. The first was the simplest. Julian had told me that morning, to my face, that he would be on a plane with no signal and his phone off. A stable, high-quality video call from a man who was supposed to be somewhere over the Atlantic was, at the very least, strange. The second I almost missed. On the call, Julian turned to address his assistant, and he called her Amelia. Full name, every syllable. I had never once, not in 6 months of transferred calls, not that morning at the car, heard Julian Mercer call her anything but Mel. The third come a minute later. He used one of his little phrases, the ones that lived in his speech without him noticing them. And then, 40 seconds after, he used the exact same phrase again, with the exact same rhythm, the exact same rise and fall, as if it had been played twice from the same recording rather than spoken twice by the same man. Inside the room, Graham nodded along and turned to a young man at the end of the table. "Nathan," he said, "start preparing the transfer." I went back to my desk, took the sealed envelope out of the cabinet and carried it up to the finance floor. I knew what I was. A temp, 3 weeks from the end of a contract, with a laminated badge that said Visitor Services. I knew that walking into a confidential financial meeting to contradict the CFO was, by every unwritten rule of that building, not my place. My whole body was telling me to put the envelope down and go back to my chair and let the important people handle the important thing. I didn't. I stepped into the doorway and I said, as steadily as I could, that the account the CEO had just read out did not match the escrow instructions that had arrived from the law firm that afternoon. I held up the envelope. I said there were 2 different sets of banking details in this room, and they didn't agree. Graham looked at me the way you'd look at a piece of furniture that had started talking. "You're the receptionist," he said. "You don't have enough information to understand what's happening here." I told him what Julian had said to me that morning, word for word, that if anyone claimed he'd called back to change the wiring instructions, they were to go through Amelia's verification process, every step, no exceptions. "The plan has changed," Graham said. "Go back to your desk." And Nathan, the young man with the keyboard, was looking, I could see it, at the 2 different account numbers. He knew, some part of him knew, but he kept typing because the CFO had told him to and because the man on the screen had the founder's face. So I said the only thing I had left, the thing I have thought about every day since. "I'm not saying he's wrong," I said. "I'm saying the man in that video hasn't passed the verification process that he himself set up. That's all. Verify him. If it's really him, you lose 2 minutes. If it isn't, you save $18 million. Nobody moved to verify him. The clock on the wall said 4:44. I walked out of the room and I did the only thing a receptionist is actually equipped to do. I made a phone call. I had the law firm's real number, the verified one, on file, the one I used every time a courier claimed to be from them. I dialed it. A lawyer picked up. And in the space of 90 seconds, everything came apart. There had been no change to the escrow account, she told me. 1. The firm had not organised any video call with the CEO. That wasn't something they did, and it certainly wasn't something they'd done today. And a man named Peter Vance? He had never worked for them. They had no one by that name. I hung up and I did the second thing a receptionist can do. I put it in writing. I sent 1 email, marked urgent, to Graham, to the legal department, and to Amelia. I wrote that the account on the video call did not match the sealed instructions from the firm, that the firm had confirmed no change and no call, that the man who'd entered that morning claiming to be their representative did not exist. I attached the visitor log. I hit send at 4:49. At 4:51, Graham called security to the finance floor and had me escorted off it, for in his words, unauthorised interference in a confidential transaction. A guard walked me to the elevator. Nathan upstairs moved to press the final confirmation on the transfer, and it wouldn't go because my email had done something I hadn't planned. The moment 2 conflicting sets of banking instructions existed inside the company's system, one in the sealed envelope logged at the front desk, one being entered on the finance floor, both now referenced in a written record. The compliance software flagged the transaction automatically. Mismatched beneficiary details, held for manual review. The money didn't move. It sat frozen, 1 keystroke away from being gone, while a security guard walked me out of the building. Graham built the other story fast, faster than I would have believed if I hadn't watched it happen to me. By the time I reached the lobby, the shape of it was already forming, and by that evening it was everywhere. Lily Ward had opened confidential documents. Lily Ward had leaked the banking details to someone outside the company. Lily Ward had, on her own initiative and with no authority, contacted the law firm, and it was that contact, that reckless call from a temp who didn't understand what she was touching, that had exposed the deal and let the fraudster in. The breach, the story went, had almost certainly come from the front desk, from the unsecured place, from me. Human Resources suspended me that Friday night. My contract, I was told, would be terminated Monday morning. It was cleaner that way, someone said. A temp, easy to let go, no long process. And the worst part is that people believed it. I could see it in the finance staff as I was walked out. A few of them, people I'd handed coffee to, held doors for, wished a good weekend to 100 times, looked at me now like I was something that had gone wrong. The temp who'd blundered into a serious matter and broken it. I gathered my things into a cardboard box at a desk I'd sat at for 6 months. And that was when I saw it. The paper guest log. The physical book where I'd written down Peter Vance's name, his number, his car, the time, the extension that approved him, was gone from my desk. Not misplaced, not tucked away. Gone. Someone had taken it. I couldn't take a single company document out of that building. They made that very clear. But here is the thing. The people who took the paper log didn't understand because they had never sat where I sat. The paper log was never the only record. It was the least of them. The visitor management system logged every entry electronically the moment I typed it. The lobby cameras recorded every person who crossed the floor. The phone system timestamped every internal call and every extension that placed it. The parking system read and stored every license plate that entered the lot. None of that lived on my desk. None of it could be lifted into a coat pocket. It sat on servers I couldn't reach, but neither, without a great deal of noise, could Graham. So I didn't try to reach it. I reached a person. In the back of the employee handbook, the one everyone is handed on day one and nobody reads, there was an address, an independent reporting channel that went directly to the audit committee, bypassing management entirely. It existed for exactly this. For the moment when the thing you needed to report was the person you'd normally report to. I wrote to Evelyn Shaw, the chair of the audit committee. I was careful. I did not accuse Graham of a crime. I didn't have the standing to, and I didn't need to. I simply laid out what I had seen in order. A visitor had entered that morning who did not appear on any calendar, admitted on the CFO's authority. That visitor had left behind a briefcase. A new escrow account had surfaced a few hours later. The paper guest log recording the visitor had now vanished from the front desk. And, this was the sentence I built the whole message around, the electronic records of all of it still existed. Evelyn Shaw did not ask whether I was a temp. She didn't ask about my contract or my authority, or why the front desk was emailing the board. She asked one thing of IT and security that night. Preserve everything immediately before anyone can touch it. They preserved it before Monday, before I was ever fired. Over that weekend, the records started to speak, and Amelia, Julian's assistant, who had spent Friday terrified she'd be blamed for sharing his schedule, started to talk. 3 weeks earlier, it turned out, Graham had put in a request to the communications team. He wanted footage of Julian, all of it, every town hall recording, every investor meeting, the long, unedited audio files. Hours and hours of the founder speaking, in every register, running through every one of those little phrases he used without knowing it. The reason Graham had written on the request was tidy and reasonable, preparing an introductory video for the acquisition. No introductory video was ever made. No one had ever seen one. No one had ever been asked to produce one. Then IT found the rest. The video conference account used for the fake call. The account Julian had appeared from at 4:38 had been created from a computer inside Graham's office. And the new beneficiary account, the one the money had almost gone to, had been added into the payment system using the CFO's own administrator privileges. That was the moment the whole thing turned over in my mind. And I think in Evelyn's too. This was not an outside attack that had slipped past a careless CFO. This was not a case of Graham being fooled by clever criminals along with everyone else. Graham hadn't been caught in the fraud. Graham had built the tools for it. On Monday morning, I was called into a conference room to be fired. I want you to understand what that room looked like when I walked in. Graham was there, composed, a folder in front of him, entirely in control. An HR representative sat beside him. And Graham did what Graham did best. He narrated calmly, precisely, the way he always talked about financial discipline. Lily Ward had violated confidentiality. Lily Ward's impulsive, unauthorised actions had damaged a sensitive transaction and exposed the company to fraud. A temporary receptionist, he explained to the room, should never have had access to financial documents in the first place, and this was the unfortunate but necessary consequence. When he finished, I asked him one question. If I'm the one who leaked the information, I said, then can you explain why the fake visitor, the man from a law firm that says he doesn't exist, was buzzed into this building on your extension? Graham didn't miss a beat. He said I must have altered the guest log. And that was when the door opened. Evelyn Shaw walked in. Behind her came the head of security, then IT, then the head of legal, then Nathan, and then 2 members of the board of directors who sat down without a word. Evelyn set a laptop on the table and she opened the electronic records. Graham stopped narrating. The lobby camera footage played first. It showed Peter Vance walking in that morning carrying the small briefcase. It showed him crossing to the elevators and going up to the CFO's floor. And 20 minutes later it showed him leaving, walking back across the lobby and out the front doors with nothing in his hands. Then the hallway camera on the executive floor played, and it showed Graham, alone, carrying that same briefcase from his office into a small side meeting room. IT had already recovered the laptop that had been inside it. The device held everything. The fake conference account, the archived videos and voice recordings of Julian Mercer, draft after draft of the wire instructions, the beneficiary details, and multiple test versions of the call itself, the same 28 seconds of Julian rehearsed over and over until the face and the voice were seamless. Peter Vance had a real name and a real relationship to the man across the table. He was Graham's brother-in-law, and the account the $18 million had almost flowed into belonged to a shell company, an empty shell with no business and no purpose that Peter Vance controlled. Graham tried one last version of the story. He said that he too had been deceived by Peter, that his brother-in-law had used him, that he'd had no idea, that he was as much a victim as anyone. So I asked of Evelyn if I could show the room something, and I laid out the timeline, not my opinion of it, just the records in order, each one time-stamped by a system that had no stake in who won. 11:04. Graham personally authorises Peter Vance into the building, off the calendar, off the books. 11:27. The briefcase is carried into Graham's office. 1:18. The fake video conference account is created from a computer inside that office. 2:06. The new beneficiary account is added to the payment system using the CFO's administrator credentials. 3:40. The real escrow instructions arrive at the front desk from the real law firm, sealed. 3:46. Graham tries to collect that sealed envelope without signing the confidential delivery log so that no record would exist of the genuine instructions ever having been in the building. 4:38. The fake call to the finance department begins. 4:44. I warn the room that the man in the video hasn't passed his own verification process. 4:51. Graham orders security to remove me from the finance floor. 5:06. HR begins preparing the report that names me as the leak. Every one of those timestamps sat on a server. Not one of them could be carried out of the building in a coat pocket. When I finished, I looked at Graham, and I said the thing that had been sitting in my chest since Friday. You didn't choose me because I had access to the money, I told him. You chose me because you thought nobody would believe the receptionist. And then, because it was true, and because everyone in that room needed to hear it, you built the fraud around the CEO's face, but you built the cover story around mine. Graham Holt and Peter Vance became the subject of a criminal investigation. Redwood referred the matter to the authorities that week, and the board removed Graham that same day. Nathan, the young man who had seen the 2 account numbers and kept typing anyway, was not fired, but he was formally disciplined for overriding the verification process, and I don't think he ever again pressed a button just because someone senior told him to. I hope he didn't, anyway. Julian Mercer landed in Europe to 100 missed messages and flew straight back. When he finally sat down across from me, the first thing he did was apologise, not for being fooled, but for building a company where the person who caught it had to fight to be heard. They offered me a permanent role in the compliance department. I didn't take it, not right away. I told Redwood I would stay on 3 conditions. First, that reception and administrative staff, the people at the doors, the people at the desks, the people everyone walks past, be included in the company's fraud prevention training, because they are the ones who see the visitors and hear the calls, and they had never once been told what they were looking at. Second, that no one in this company would ever again be disciplined for triggering a verification process on a transaction. Not ever. If you slow down $18 million to check that it's real, you get thanked, not escorted out. And third, that every urgent transfer requested by leadership, every single one, be confirmed through an independent channel before it moves. no matter how much the person on the call looks and sounds like the CEO. Because I had learned in 28 minutes on a Friday afternoon exactly how little a face and a voice are worth, they agreed to all three. And then I took the job, not the one they first offered, a new one that hadn't existed before. Vendor and Identity Verification Coordinator. Not because I was the lucky temp who happened to notice something, but because the company finally understood what I had been the whole time. I was never outside their system of controls. I was one. For 6 months, they looked through me the way you look through the glass at a reception desk. But glass has one quality the powerful always seem to forget. You don't have to pay attention to it. It still sees everything that passes through.